Thank you for those of you who have joined us in person and anyone who is joining online for our presentation this afternoon on challenges and amplifiers for the Ukrainian democracy, politics, and civil society during 600 days of the war, which is sponsored by the Petro Yatsyk program for the study of Ukraine at the Center for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies here at the University of Toronto. My name is Ksenia Kibazinski, and I'm co-director of the program, and it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Yuliya Bidenko, who is a professor in political science at the Karazin Kharkiv National University, we have the pleasure of welcoming her to Canada. Professor Bidenko is one of the foremost kind of voices right now, speaking throughout North America and Europe, whether in person or online. She was one of our first speakers when the full-scale invasion started in February 2022 here at U of T. Voices from the ground, I think it was a week into the invasion, a very powerful presentation that moved many of us. Professor Bidenko is a specialist on problems of civil society, decentralization, ideologies, political regime changes, and the establishment of democratic institutions and reforms in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. She has held various prestigious fellowships throughout Europe. She's invited to speak for various NGOs, civil society centers, and whatnot. But I'm going to now turn over the floor to Professor Bidenko. Please, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really flattered with such a generous presentation and introduction. And yeah, I remember how we met online on March, I believe, 2022, and I was in Ukraine and was challenged by numerous problems to cope with, because I'm from Kharkiv. It's the second largest city in Ukraine, the large university city, which is probably the most affected among those which are not occupied at this moment. And I remember how I fled myself when Russian tanks appeared on the street of my city, and then how I managed to evacuate my beloved, my mom and my cat, who took this evacuation train. And it was really a long and very exhausting journey. And then when I find myself in the middle of Ukraine, somewhere in Khmelnytsky Oblast, I began to volunteer because it was no other possibilities but to help people in Kharkiv, because they faced with a huge humanitarian crisis. Everything was closed, pharmacies, supermarkets, and I remember how we delivered some trucks with bread or humanitarian aid from Europe, and a lot of people from civil society, but also those who hadn't any experience, they tried to collect this aid, they tried to deliver it at least to the Ukrainian border, but how to solve this problem and to bring all this generous present and assistance to the city, which located only 40 kilometers to a border. It was a huge challenge for those who jumped into volunteering. Now, when the unprovoked Russian aggression kind of continues during more than 500 days, and soon it will be 600 days, I think Ukrainian society, Ukrainian volunteers, they face with new challenges, and an expert community now also being able to adjust probably this logistic and humanitarian aid supplies, still try to find new possibilities how to rebuild Ukraine. I visited Kharkiv 2 months ago, and from one point of view, it was heartbreaking for me to see some devastation of my university building as well. But from another point of view, I can see how this new newly appeared or newly emerged networks, they managed to sustain itself. And now a lot of people, expert in Ukraine, citizens in Ukraine, mayors, local council deputies, activists, they facing with a new challenging thinking how to develop Ukrainian democracy under the martial law, how to help Ukrainian cities to rebuild themselves, who should be in charge for this reconstruction, and how to design this multiply, I would say, or multi-actor process and huge process, which now is called Ukrainian reconstruction. But also we prefer to talk more about recovery, because it's not only physical or infrastructural reconstruction. We are talking about how to renew the full functioning democracy in Ukraine. And that is why I would like to begin with some kind of preconditions that we were before the war. You can see this graph from the Freedom House, the organization I worked with for a while, and I composed the report on Ukraine just before the war, and it was published in April 2022. So we also need to revise our rankings. And of course, the full-scale war, it's not the case when I would prefer to say I told you, but I really attempt to kind of increase democracy ranking for Ukraine, especially taking into account the readiness of civil society to solve numerous problems, not talking about the full-scale war, but still. So we can see that in the region, which is called Eastern and Southern Europe, there are some regime changes. For example, some countries like Armenia and Moldova, they succeeded to improve their democracy regarding their starting position when they consider it to be authoritarian regimes. But from another point of view, we have another processes with, for example, Hungary and some Western Balkan states who started with a not bad position as a newly appeared democracies, but then they decrease the level of individual freedom, and probably now Poland also experienced these, because there are some problems with justice, with female rights, gender equality, and so on and so forth. And of course, a lot of countries in this region affected by populism. And to be true, Ukraine is not is not an exception here. But what is interesting with Ukrainians, I'm sorry, there are some answers in Ukrainian from diagrams, but I will translate it for you. So it's a recent opinion poll conducted by Ranking Sociological Group, and the Ukrainians were asked, do you consider Ukraine to be a successful state? And it is very interesting that since the full-scale invasion was launched by Russia, more and more Ukrainians reconsider their, let's say, perception of the state, of the Ukrainian state, and the blue sectors of this diagram is totally yes or yes, more or less yes. So I do consider Ukraine to be a successful state. And we can see these regions, type of the settlement, like a city, village, or a town, and age, and we can see any significant differences in between that, which is quite surpriseful, especially for those who preach that Ukraine is a regionally divided, that the generation gap is so crucial in Ukraine because, for example, we can have the older generation consider to be a Soviet people and youngsters who consider themselves to be Europeans. But we can see that this social cohesion probably based or grounded on this perception of the state. And I would say that a lot of Ukrainians, they were surprised and then appreciate the efforts which local self-government and governmental institutions made during the war, and how they cope with all these challenges that Ukraine faced since 2022. And Ukrainians within this survey were also asked, what are the main features of the successful state for you? And let's say top 5 among these, it's a strong army. 56% consider that strong army is kind of very important for the state to be successful. It's easy to explain why it is so in Ukraine, where the army forces kind of those who provide beliefs in victory and faith for and hope for the future. And yesterday it was the day when Ukraine celebrate and commemorate those who are fighting for Ukraine, both male and female. So it's called День захисників і захисниць України. So female and male protectors of Ukraine. And all my feed in any social network was full with the personal, gratitudes to the people who are fighting for Ukraine. But another, I would say, features for the successful state to Ukrainians is the developed market economy, justice and rule of law, and social cohesion. So I think that it is not so much different that we have when we are asking people about state of democracy in, let's say, Western European country. At least the European Barometer also show us the very comparable data. What is puzzling me here that the strong democratic institutions are not so highly appreciated now among Ukrainians, because the strong democratic institutions, which are the main feature of the democracy, appreciated only by 14% of Ukrainians. But what is good here as well, that national idea, which could be a little bit successful and played to for Russian propaganda, I would say it's even appreciated by 11%. So there is no so much unity about that we need the single national idea in Ukraine. Among others, there are political stabilities, developed and contemporary science and education. There are equality in the society and social protection for citizens. What is united Ukrainian? It's the recent poll, also by Ranking Group. And there are some very important, I would say, ideas. Of course, the belief in Ukrainian victory and this hope for Ukrainian victory, it's the main idea or main emotion now for Ukrainians. But about half of informants, they said that hope for reconstruction, an idea of a future reconstruction, is also could unify Ukrainian society. Helping each other, mutual support is appreciated by 40%. And what is interesting here, that accession to the EU and NATO is equally important for people in Kyiv, in the Western Ukraine, and what is interesting in Donbass. So it is not so easy as it was portrayed by Russian propaganda, right? But for the residents of Taos, East, and Donbass, this belief or idea of reconstruction of the country and mutual assistance and return refugees back is kind of a triangle which is unifying them much more. And what is disunite Ukrainians, or what about their fears about to be like disconnected to each other as a society, or to lose this social cohesion? It's a political conflicts, and it's typical Ukrainian story, repeated numerously during Ukrainian history. And I would say that probably at least Ukrainian society, probably not Ukrainian elites, they learned their lessons here, and they people really afraid of politicians who will fight to each other and compete to each other. And actually, there are also some fears about this disconnection within society on a horizontal level, and this mutual accusation, which are already slightly present in social networks, especially in Facebook, which is the most used and politicized network currently in Ukraine, not a Twitter, not an Instagram, but the Facebook. There are already some kind of fightings between Ukrainians who deserves to call himself or herself Ukrainian, more those who fled the country or those who stayed with the cities, those who are fighting or those who are volunteering, those who are kind of staying in Ukraine but in another community, so those who kind of volunteering from abroad. So there are some cleavages which getting more and more visible, and I would say not only visible but probably vocal and obvious for Ukrainian society. There are also kind of fears among Ukrainians, and of course being betrayed by our Western partners and failed reconstruction, a lacking of this recovery also is kind of a I would say purpose to be disturbed. But let's talk about Ukrainian values and why it is important as for me. Because of course during the war the value of human life, of course it's absolute value for 92% of Ukrainians, but what is interesting that about 90% of Ukrainians, they also consider human freedom and rights will be the greatest value for them, and mutual trust, mutual aid, and is also very important. So I would say that Ukrainian society, based not only on this social cohesion and people feel that they can trust to each other and rely to each other, and most of people, and even me personally and my relatives, they faced with this, assistance from strangers during the most crisis, I would say, or peak of crisis events. But still, there are a lot of people who appreciate freedom and human rights even more than this. So I would say that for me, it's leaving a room for hope that it's not only about rallying around the flag, when people try to be harmful, or unite around the leader when it is a crisis in society, but also it's more about freedom, independence, and selfness and dignity. It's confirmed with the question or distribution of answer, better to say, when Ukrainians were asked what is the main principles that government should kind of stay with. Most of people consider it is human rights, human dignity, and freedom. So this triangle is, I would say, very important because it's really different from what people in authoritarian or hybrid societies mostly say. That is the newest survey from Razumkov Center. I will provide you, of course, with presentation to appreciate your appearance here and sacrificing your time. But when Ukrainians were asked in August 2023, so it's more than a year since the full-scale invasion have been started, do you feel free yourself? Ukrainians feel themselves more free than before the war. And it is very interesting answer, because we know that under the martial law, some freedoms, they are really restricted. But from another point of view, of course, facing with curfew, facing with kind of limitations for freedom of speech, still Ukrainians feel themselves free. And what is important here, they appreciate freedom more than equality, for example. So they put freedom over equality, which is not very typical for post-Soviet countries, where equality was kind of a basic, value, rule, and the core of communist propaganda, let's say so. And what is interesting here, that before the war and just after the war in 2022, most of Ukrainians said that it is very important for them that Ukraine will become a fully functioning democracy after the war. And there is also no huge regional differences in there, as well as the generation gap is also missing here. But it is nothing new about this, because since, I would say, 2014, but here is the results of youth project launched by Western institution, joint Western institution, on the democratic developments in Ukraine. We can see that support for democracy among Ukrainians was steadily increased, and when the war started, it's kind of getting more and more appreciated. The dynamic is pretty interesting, that it is, I would like to show you how it developed, because it's not only the war and shock of the war, and people just find that democracy is better because they are fighting with the Russian state, which is not a democracy at all. So it's not the desire to state something or to declare something in contrast. We can see that since, I would say, even Yanukovych time, the share of those who would like to see Ukraine as democracy was decreasing over the years. And the number of those who said that, okay, probably democracy is not perfect, but it's kind of a best form of rule, or best mode of rule, it was also increasing over the years. It is very important for Ukrainians to relaunch democratic institutions. It's also the results of this Razumkov Center survey. And for me, as a political scientist, it's also important to see how these different regimes are competing in public consciousness, because there are a lot of opinion polls, not only in Ukraine, but elsewhere in the world, when people are asking, do you want your country to be democracy? Of course. Do you want a strong leader? Of course. Do you want, can you agree with some limitations of certain rights to have something, kind of benefits from social payments or economical developments? Of course. So it's very dependent on how you formulate the question. And for me, it's interesting here that still there are a lot of people in Ukraine who would agree, or rather agree, that a strong leader who is independent of parliament and elections could be the good choice for Ukraine. But from another point of view, we can see that the vast majority still prefer a democratic political system. So probably it's during past 5 or 7 years, the majority of Ukrainians prefer democracy over this strong leadership. What is interesting here, that a military rule or a military regime, which could be the alternative for societies just after the war or during the war, is not so much appreciated. The proportion between those who could take it as a normality, and proportion of those who consider this system to be bad or rather bad is in favor of those who reject the junta or military system in our country, in Ukraine. And what is interesting here, the more and more people, comparatively to, for example, 2010 or 2021, the proportion of those who think that, okay, Ukraine is not democracy, so people are sober and realistic about the state of the things in their country, this proportion is getting higher comparatively to share of those who said, okay, Ukraine is not democratic country, but it's not even moving to this direction. So a lot of people, vast majority of people actually, about 70% of Ukrainians saying, okay, we are living not in full democracy, but we all together going there. We're working all together to launch or to adjust democratic institutions. So it's very realistic approach, and I think it shows how Ukrainian society reconsidered their country after the Euromaidan, and especially after the full-scale invasion. What I would say democratic instruments were available to Ukrainian people, it's not so few of them, but still a lot of them were very kind of rarely used by people. So legally, the law, the constitution, the decrees, they provided people with numerous possibilities or opportunities to influence the political developments in their community or in their country in general. What is still on the table during the war, it's of course petitions. It's the electronic or digital instruments for participation, which are under development and skyrocketed now. And a lot of other instruments like community gathering or public hearings, they are not prohibited officially. To be true, last week there were some protests in Kyiv against the reconstruction held or launched by Mr. Klitschko, who is mayor there. So they protested that money spending for roads, but not forwarding to a front line. And in Kharkiv, 2 weeks ago, there also were protests against the illegal or unfair plans of mayor to build a new office center in the center of the city, in the park of the city, in the central park of the city. So people are still aware, and they are not prohibited to ban legally to get in, to have some protests, demonstrations, and so on and so forth. There were huge questions about the transparency of authorities during the war, because under the martial law, they closed a lot of public information which was available before. And I think it was a huge step forward from a civil society and some, I would say, part of politicians who made it happen. And Ukraine relaunched electronic declaration for all public servants, which were kind of postponed or temporarily delayed during the war. And also Ukrainian parliament voted to renew the financial accountability and transparency for political parties, which is also very important. During all this 1 year and a half, most of officials and political party members, they said, we can't provide this information because Russian security services could use it against us, and so on and so forth. But during the 3 months or 4 months of consultation, experts and MPs, they find this balance, and finally they relaunched some instruments of accountability. But I would say that supporting Ukrainians, like regular Ukrainians, in opinion that Ukraine is not a democracy at this moment, at least in this classical way, but it is moving there. I would say that like in many other countries of Eastern and Southern Europe, elections were the most kind of well-known and used instrument among others, because some people weren't aware about another everyday instruments, how to participate in for example, the local community lives and so on and so forth, how to control government better. But elections considered to be the main one. And it is a few words about Ukrainian elections and how they develop, and why it is important for Ukrainians to have it, but why for me it's important not to have it under the war ongoing. On your right, you can see the results for 2012. Under the Yanukovych parliamentary elections, and we can see really that Ukraine was a torn country, originally kind of divided country, because pink it's kind of sorry, it is the democratic or pro-Western parties, and blue is a party of region. We can see really this very obvious division. But if we zoom in and try to also analyze the results on single mandate constituencies elections, we can see that it's not so obvious, this division. So if we are going to post-Maidan parliamentary elections in 2014, there is on my left, you can see that Ukraine getting more and more mosaic. So there are more political parties who are competing to each other. So it's not just two parties which portray each other as a pure evil. We can see that there are some alternatives, and there were a lot of support to not only Mr. Poroshenko, who started probably, or who provoked Russia to use this Kyiv regime expression in their propaganda, but we can see that there is a shrinking support to party of region after the 2014, after the Euromaidan revolution, but also it's increasing support for different projects, which from the ideological point of view could be named like a centric, national centric, like People's Front, Poroshenko Party, Yuliya Tymoshenko Party. So there were a lot of competition there, and the lower map is also results for single mandate constituencies elections, and we can see that the most of those who won there were independent candidates. So there were people who were working with the with population in their communities, and probably they don't share any strict ideologies or don't want to associate with the parties, but try to be responsible for people who are living in certain territories. And here's the first local elections after Maidan, where decentralization started, and we can see that there is nothing in common with like a regionally divided country. It's very, it's kind of a patchwork. It's very mosaic, and we can see that when the decentralization was launched, and the probably first very slight effects have been achieved, we can see that people mostly voted for different parties, but it also was connected with a competition between parties for local leaders. So there were active people on the ground, and political parties tried to hunt them. That is why it's so mosaic, because those who were activist volunteers, probably anti-terroristic operation veterans at that time, they were kind of a good price for any political parties, and they bargained about join one another. And what happened in 2019? It's presidential elections, first round, and my colleague Olga Onoch and Henry Hale, they recently presented the book Zelensky Effect. I'm not totally agree with the kind of some conclusions, but still it is obvious that there is no division between Ukrainian regions in supporting Volodymyr Zelensky on presidential elections. The blue one is dark blue, navy blue is results for Yuliya Tymoshenko. Light blue is for Yuri Boyko, who represented this party of region, old elites, and the red one is kind of support for that time incumbent president, Mr. Poroshenko. So to lose elections after Euromaidan, it was for me the sign that Ukrainians want more and more reforms probably, and they get disappointed, and definitely it's not the way as Russia presented Kyiv regime, because when you have two different presidents during kind less than 10 years who are competed each other pretty roughly, I would say it's hard to say that it's one single regime acting since the revolution. But what is interesting here, Mr. Zelensky, after being elected, tried to convert his own popularity to the support in parliament. That is why he called the earlier elections for Верховная Rada of Ukrainian parliament. And we can see here that it's not so kind of much support, so it's getting fading, I would say, or getting some kind of harassment or kind of erosion, here, and more independent candidates also begin to compete with those who possess this charismatic servant of a people brand. And next year, after being elected, I would say that Mr. Zelensky and his party, they actually lost local elections. There are results for regions and regional councils, and we can see that mostly they have a vast majority only in one single region. In all others, where there are different colors, pure colors, they were mostly regional projects, political projects who won elections. And where it is ambivalent, like two colors, the servant of people need to share the majority with the local parties. So actually, they lost, and I think it was great lesson to Mr. Zelensky to learn, because I remember when they launched these elections, how do you think how many members servant of the people have all over Ukraine? So it's year after they won parliamentary and presidential election. How many members of the party have kind of all around Ukraine? As of summer 2020, just a year after the triumph of Mr. Zelensky and servant of the people. Just guess.
100.
How many?
100.
100. Okay, other.
Well, it depends what you mean by party membership. Like in Canada, very, very few people belong to parties. They don't have party cards.
Okay.
So the notion of party, it just depends. In some places, if you want to work, you have to be a party member. In other places, like I don't think anybody here or Canadians is a member of a political party. And we're into politics. We're interested in politics.
Yeah, thank you for this remark. But in Ukraine, even to register a political party, you need to have kind of certain number of members just to start your political party. And of course, the vast majority of Ukrainians, they are not party members because during the, I would say, all term of Ukrainian independence, most people try to avoid any official membership elsewhere, not only in political parties, but also in NGOs. But what is interesting here that, for example, Yulia Tymoshenko party had more than 10,000 members, even losing its popularity over the years. Well, the most supported political party in 2020, Mr. Zelensky party, counted only 500 of members all over Ukraine. So it's also kind of an answer, because mostly to run an election, you're not obligatory to be a member of a party, but still it's very desirable for political party itself to have a lot of members officially. Well, I think these results of local elections in 2020 are kind of resulted by decentralization effects. It's ambitious multi-layer reform launched in Ukraine since 2015. And the core idea was to reduce the number of inefficient local communities and to amalgamate them, to accumulate all the resources for these communities, and also to revise the tax system and to let them collect all money and leave it on the place, and to be more independent from a central government in the way how they spend it. But also there were some side effects of these decentralization effects, because also the local self-government bodies, they were free to decide which instruments of direct democracy to use, how to involve people. And they get really interested in this, because they understood that, okay, we are more or less independent from Kyiv, but we are dependent from our community. If businesses are leaving to a neighborhood community, you have no money for budget. If people are not supporting that you are building school but not the ambulance, you won't be re-elected next time. So there were numerous initiatives from mayors, from newly elected local councils, how to involve people. And I would say that I witnessed it myself in the Kharkiv region, not only in Kharkiv region, probably in Donbass area, even which was under Ukrainian control, of course, that these communities, they really became closer to people. Community, I would say, officials. And from another point of view, people get more united and more organized to push some agenda, to influence, to be interested in local developments. And there are some grassroots initiatives appeared in Ukraine, and youth councils were created, some female councils even were created, which cooperated and collaborated with the mayors, so local councils. So these voices of population get more vocal, and the trust to local authorities and to local government steadily increased in Ukraine, at least before 2022, when the full-scale war started. And still local self-government is very trusted to Ukraine, but the only difference that people also trust in central government more than before. And about Ukrainian civil society, I would say that it's really had a new impulse since Euromaidan, since 2014, when they were involved in the development of reforms, in implementation of numerous reforms, but also they hardly advocated for the approximation of Ukrainian law with the EU law, and they pushed this movement towards the European Union. A lot of people began to volunteer in 2014 when the annexation of Crimea and war in Donbass started. For example, in Kharkiv, we faced with more than 300,000 of people who came from Donbass as internally displaced people. And the state was, and local authorities, they were helpless. They were kind of lost. There were no regulations for that. They were kind of a new situation, an unexpected situation. And they were volunteers who just established the informational point on Kharkiv railway station, and then it turned into very famous organization Stanция Kharkiv, so like point railway station Kharkiv, and they have more than 100 of people who arrived from Donetsk, Lugansk, and other smaller towns of the region. So there are some initiatives which existed just long before the war, but they were very helpful as a role models, as a framework to unite active people who are kind of caring about the country. And I would say that during the full-scale invasion, this civil society expanded dramatically. There were people from business who jump into volunteer, and they were people from, I would say, IT sector who decided to volunteer themselves, or who, for example, pay their taxes in advance for a year to support Ukrainian government. It's also unimaginable before the full-scale invasion. And there were a lot of people who just have trucks, and they find themselves to deliver humanitarian aid for elderly people, for single mothers who stayed, or those who evacuated cats, kids, and also people with disabilities. So it's really, for me, was a time of skyrocketing popularity of being involved in mutual assistance. From another point of view, there are some systematic problems for Ukrainian civil society. They are very dependent on international aid and foreign donors, especially, in the most expert or the most educated part, who is able to push reforms, who is able to project and to discuss, for example, future reconstruction or decision which are to be made on parliamentary, governmental, or even local level. So all these think tanks and expert groups, they are very dependent on a framework under which donors kind of see them working. But if to kind of evaluate Ukrainian civil society, there are others indicators. Probably if you're students, you also prefer them to use in your essays or PhD or master thesis. We can see from here, it's the index of sustainability of civil society institutions, which is developed by USAID, but it used since 2005. And we can see here that actually Ukraine is a normal Eastern or Southern European country in terms of civil society development. And I can show you the dynamics of NGO which were registered in Ukraine since the independence in 1991, when the independence was proclaimed. It was more than 300 of organizations appeared just immediately. So every day somebody registered a new organization in Ukraine. But now we have more than, it's 2021 because it was the last kind of open data, but some data from the Ministry of Justice show that now it is more than 120,000 of organizations already registered and operate in Ukraine. But it's, for me, it's not the same. They are fully operational now, because, for example, I run 2 organizations myself, but I'm active only in one of them. Sorry. Yeah, but they were very liberal condition to register organization. Only 2 people needed for this, and there are free of charge, so you can do it without any payments for a state, and it is possible online since the corona pandemic, and it wasn't forbidden to register new civil society institutions during the war. That is why we have expansions of this organization and charity funds. What is also significant here for me, that there is a UN report about how they operate in Ukraine to provide humanitarian assistance in the frame or under umbrella. There are numerous programs like supplying water supplies, or UN women, or the Commissar for Human Rights. So there are different UN agencies there. Most of them are involved in Ukraine, but we can see that actually they have numerous partners among Ukrainian organization, which already existed in Ukraine, which is not very typical for, I would say, societies in the war in Africa or even in Balkans. So if we apply to these conflict studies and the experience that, for example, United Nations organization had in Africa or Asia, or even on Western Balkans in the 90s, we can see that most of their partners were international NGOs. For example, they have money, and international NGOs, they are coming, bringing people with them who are educated, who trained, and they supply like a local population with something to help them to survive. In Ukraine, we have the opposite situation, where the most of partners are national NGOs. So these structures and people who already were trained, who already exist, operate there, who know local kind of issues, and who have a lot of capacities to operate and to, let's say, to cope with UN bureaucracy as well, because it's also part of issues for Ukrainian civil society now, because still donors demand all these reports to be done in time. And I will wrap up soon. I think we have kind of time for Q&As, but there is aggregate indicators for civic activism and public trust in Ukraine during past 10 years. And we can see here, I collected them, I extracted them from different surveys. We can see that actually engagement in any civic activities, when people have been asked, did you take part in public hearings or in activities of NGOs, it was pretty low in Ukraine, as well as membership in NGOs or political parties. It's always lower than 5% of citizens who kind of register it as a members of this organization. But we can see that volunteering activities and charity and donations, they were more or less popular among Ukrainians, as well as public trust to non-governmental organizations and volunteers. Actually, according to very fresh data, there are 3 main institutions which Ukrainians believe in or trust in mostly. First, it's Ukrainian army. Second, it is Mr. Zelensky himself, like a president of Ukraine. And third, volunteers. So it's interesting that 2 of them are not personalized by somebody. But my point here, that it's not really around the flag. We can see the steady growing of public awareness about instruments, how to influence your local council's mayor, how to fix the situation in your neighborhood. And this awareness increased from 38% of people who really were to whom apply, how to act, which services are responsible for what, to 70% in 2021 before the war. So I would say that Ukrainian society was pretty aware about how institutions are functioning, and I would say that this readiness to participate in civic life, it's also increased, and that is why, in a way, all these neighborhood small networks of mutual assistance, they really appeared very fast. I remember from the experience of my mom, they were very supportive to each other in their neighborhood. It's not a suburban, it's just a high-rise building like you have here in Toronto, and I can imagine that all people in the condo would even know each other or saying hello to each other. But in your case, I think the overall culture is more kind of making people more polite, at least. In Ukraine, it could be more complicated, but this network, when people share in their bread and others have some speck or meat, and they really created these networks. And probably if you're aware with the situation in Mariupol during first months of invasion and these heartbreaking practices of survival, people haven't no gas, electricity, and so on and so forth, but they launched this shared kitchen in their yards, in their courtyards, and there is not the only case here. So I would say that before 2022, Ukrainians get more and more aware about how to make their lives and their communities better. They get more united, and that is, for me, one of the cornerstones of Ukrainian resilience and resistance during first weeks of invasion, when in some communities of the eastern and southern region, which were occupied during, let's say, one day, people try to stop Russian tanks with their bare hands and saying, it's our land, go away from here, or when they hide some activists in their basement. So it wasn't something wearing you. It is heroic. It is a kind of behavior under the stressful conditions. But in a way, Ukrainian society was a bit prepared, or at least try to be more active. When it goes to the during the war participation, I would say that about 70% of Ukrainians didn't take part in any civic activities like public hearing. So it's more for me about martial law, when people are afraid to gather together because they could be attacked by Russian drones, for example. So from the side of local self-government, there were also kind of dramatically decreasing of any public activities, because in that case, they would be responsible for people, security, and lives. But what is more inspiring me here, it's on my left, when people were asked, are you involved in volunteering, not in official, let's say, public hearings and local community activities? Half of people said yes. So you can see it's equally divided, and it's proportion between those who are not volunteering at all and those who are doing it from time to time or doing it like on daily basis. And I would say that 5 minutes and I will stop. I would say that people consider in a very different instruments how to be involved in this resilience building, or even in this resistance. 78% of Ukrainians switch into Ukrainian language, I would say, or begin to speak more Ukrainian in their private life. And I could see from my own bubble, I'm from Russian-speaking city. Of course, intelligentsia and those who are educated or from the university community, they were speaking Ukrainian since 2014. But let's say regular people who just running their businesses, own their, I would say, coffee shops or something, they were mostly speaking Russian. And even my ethnical Russian bestie who saved me when it was crucial to flee to the city, she's switching to Ukrainian with her 3-year-old daughter. She wants her daughter to speak Ukrainian, but not Russian. She is Russian herself. He has not a lot. She has not a lot of Ukrainian blood, but it's not about ethnicity. It's more about your civic choices and thinking about the future of your children. And among others, there are also huge number of Ukrainians who are donating money to army forces, who are donating money for humanitarian needs, like to assist IDPs, internally displaced people, or who donated or take some kind of personal efforts to save people who have fled Ukraine or their regions to another regions. Half of people try to be helpful in hosting or assisting another way those who fled from southern and eastern part of Ukraine. And there were some people who even joined the army forces or National Guard or territorial defense troop, especially during the first year of the war. It was up to 15% of Ukrainians who decided to do it voluntarily. And that is why my own definition, what is happening in Ukraine, I think it's a kind of a emergence and adjust this culture of resilience, which as for me is not a temporary effect, but I would say it's something that could be and should be developed in Ukraine. And for me, it's kind of rethinking the civic culture definition made by Gabriel Almond or Simon Verba. It's a set of values, emotions, but also behavioral patterns, which allow you to care not only about your very close circus or your bubble, but makes you care about the broader radius of those people, actors, institutions, probably, or territory that concern you, that you concern or you attach with personally. Well, I would like to show you probably some illustration from my home city, Kharkiv. They all made during the war, and you can see how people try to help communal workers who are actually also kind of heroes for me. They were working all the time. So every week at least, sometimes every day, there were explosions in Kharkiv. The city was under attack, kind of sometimes it was several times per day. And of course, there are huge devastation there, but communal workers reacted immediately. But regular Kharkivers and Kharkiv residents, they tried to help them. They understood that it's not only the purpose of those who are paid for this. It's our community, and we need to help each other to make it nice and keep it nice. And if you let me, I can show you the other photos of Kharkiv, which were made by me 2 months ago, and we can see these large buildings of, for example, regional administration or security service building, which are totally destroyed. But just across the street, you can see the nice park, and people try to forget about the security issues and just try to catch some summer sun. And there are perfect flowers, perfectly, shaped and reshaped trees and bushes. So, probably everyday life in Ukraine, as well as democratic developments in Ukraine, seems surreal sometimes. But for me, when I see everyday practices as well as huge decision made by parliament or government, and there is still a progress there. They launch a new system for reconstruction. They try to be transparent in this. They try to seek some solutions. Sometimes and frequently they are pushed by civil society and expert community. And I do believe in this sandwich approach, when from the bottom line it's Ukrainian citizen and civil society, and from the upper line it's international donors and our foreign partners who demand more democracy there. But still, thinking about everyday practices and thinking on governmental decision and movements, I really have a large room for hope that Ukrainian democracy would develop even despite all the efforts of Russian Federation to interrupt any developments in any directions there in Ukraine. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, and we've exhausted you. There was so much.
I could continue. I have
I
some,
know, I
some
can
local
see there was
Ukrainian reconstruction, but I decided to
such
skip it. And
so much sharing of data, so much sharing of your expertise. Really quite. I have at least 3 different kinds of questions, but I will
Sure.
open it up to the floor first for our participants here to ask.
When our speakers formulate, our guests formulate questions, you may see my contacts. You are able to ask everything or approach me later with an email or Twitter or Facebook. So please, if you need some clarification about the data or the full kind of survey to provide from my side, please do not hesitate. And I also wanted to say that this smiling guys, it's political science department students from Kharkiv who joined the army and sacrificed their lives. So please appreciate your freedom, appreciate the peace in your country, but do not be afraid to fight for this if it's under the risk. So it's the main, I would say, idea from them. That is why they did it.
So I'll start. I have a big picture question and a more narrow question. So a local and an international, although the local one also connects to international. But I'll start with Russia's neighbors. We're not going to talk about Russia, but Poland, Hungary, Slovakia versus Moldova, Romania. And Slovakia just had their election this weekend. And you were here during the event in Parliament here in Ottawa. I'm sure you're very well aware. Poland has made some statements, and and they have their elections coming up, and we don't, no. So aside from this horrific neighbor that up to the north and to the east, what for Ukraine's continuing development of democracy, what role do those countries, like Poland, Hungary, Slovakia is one group, play versus Moldova, Romania, and maybe even Turkey?
Thank you for this question. I think it deserves special panel about foreign relations and foreign support for Ukraine. I wouldn't kind of link too much Hungary and Poland, because definitely there is no single policy making from their side, and I would never consider Turkey as a promoter of democracy in the region. But still, this support and their actions are really very important to Ukraine. To be true, I was in Poland for an expert seminar just 2 weeks ago, and it was exactly that night when Zelensky have this speech in the UN, and all my Polish colleagues asked me, what was it actually? Why he's kind of, what the reason of this accusation that Poland is acting together with Russia now? And I said, do not beat me. I'm not his speechwriter. but still, yeah, there is also elections. There are elections forthcoming in Poland and Slovakia. And yeah, that's true that Ukraine is dependent, totally dependent in the terms of I would say military. In the military terms, it's totally dependent on Western support. And the worst here that this Western support comes from electoral democracies as well. So we really depended not only from politicians and their will and emotions, but also from emotions and attitudes of citizens. What I was glad about that in Poland, for example, they are not playing this Ukrainian card during the elections. So if not talking about farmers and their policy regarding the Ukrainian grain, mostly there are no speculations about we have a lot of Ukrainian refugees who are still in our jobs and so on and so forth. So at least there are no this kind of speculations, and that is why I more rely on Poland here, and it is very significant player at this moment. But what is kind of given a hope for me here that actually the largest partner of Ukraine now in terms of amount of assistance, in terms of numerous number of projects and numerous projects that I already launched, and kind of directions of assistance to the European Union. And these countries you mentioned, they are members of European Union. So I do know that a lot of people in the European Union itself, especially in some country members, they are not very satisfied how slowly Brussels can be of us. But when the war started, I think it's unseeable before support from the European Union, and the decision they made were pretty fast and I would say efficient. So that is why we rely on these balances, because of course there are a lot of space for populism, especially in front of elections forthcoming, but still there are some obligations for country members within the European Union and probably NATO, and that is why I think that after elections it would be not in a worse way from these countries. And as to Turkey, it's interesting how they try to play it on both sides, and they try to balance just to declare themselves probably of leaders of the Black Sea region. And also going back to Romania and Moldova, Romania is not so strict about at least military support for Ukraine, but Moldova is getting more and more together with Ukraine in accession to the EU or in developing joint energy policies. And we can see that from they really torn country, because the support for, let's say, Soviet Union and Russia and European choice was more or less equal up to 2022. Now they made the decision and it is decided. So I think that, of course, I think that we will be partners, and think that Ukraine could be also the role model in some way for Moldova, because, for example, as to the EU approximation, we have kind of 7 main tasks, they have 9. So we are, even despite the war, Ukraine have been more successful in this, sprint or marathon probably to get closer to the European Union.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a very stimulating presentation, and I thought it followed well on the presentation we had of that brilliant student who, it's the School of Economics in Kiev. Do you remember that? It was in the spring, and your data just reinforced the data we saw there. But I just, and you don't, incidentally, I'm not Ukrainian. And as it turns out, I was.
Don't be ashamed of it.
I'm not ashamed of it, and I grew up in an area with a lot of Ukrainians in Western Canada. And as it turns out, I was born in Romania, but I was very young, and I'm not Romanian. You don't have to convince us of the resilience of the Ukrainian character. I mean, anybody who survived what happened in the first half of the 20th century in Ukraine. But this is what I'm interested in. You're from Kharkiv. There's a my understanding is that large part of the reason that Donbass swung away, that it's divided in Crimea and the Russians came in, is because the rationale was that after the revolution of 2014, which you're a great supporter of, there was a repression of Russian language education and Russian speakers. And so I'm interested in your particular city, which has more Russian influence than Western Ukraine, of course. Talk to us about the changing status of the Russian language, because we had, my understanding is, Russian-speaking institutions, and all of a sudden, there was a push against that, and many of the rights that Russian speakers perceived they had were eliminated or dramatically cut back. So, and also, of course, the survey you present as Ukraine, well, it includes the unoccupied parts of Ukraine.
Sure.
And of course, there would be problems in surveying the occupied parts, because it's under the thumb of Russia. But okay, so you see, I want to know about the condition of Russian speakers.
Yeah, thank you so much for this complicated question, but I will try to be totally honest with you and give you a kind of a balanced answer, because I am a scientist. I will start probably from the last point about the surveys on occupied territories. As a sociologist, by my origin, by my education, I can see any possibilities to get any undoubtful data from here. I doubt even some data that I showed you, I mean, in precise numbers, because Ukrainian population experienced kind of a huge movement, and pollsters who still launching this or conducting these polls within Ukraine control part, they sometimes it's hard to reach these people, because some of them in Poland, others in Western Ukraine, but they try at least to use their data and phones, for example, as the representatives of the East, even despite the physically some of them in Lviv or in Kyiv. So I can doubt some numbers, but I can see that different pollsters given more or less approximately, I would say, comparable data. That is why I think that we can talk about the trend, but probably all the percentages could be not so clear, right? About Russian language, well, it is complicated question. But just I want to remember the exact data. It wasn't the one decree which was adopted by Ukrainian government just after Euromaidan. Let's repress all the Russian speakers. No, it was kind of complex of policies. First is, for example, for official servants, which obliged them to use Ukrainian as the only language in documentation and in proceeding the like a routine and so on and so forth. The other adopted in 2014 was a law on higher education, which also declared the language of higher education in Ukraine is Ukrainian. If other is not supposed by the program, special program, for example, you can get one in English, like in medicine, there were a huge demand from students from India or from Africa who came to Ukraine. The other in 2017 was the newly adopted law on radio and television, which launched some quotas for Ukrainian content in radio and television, which oblige up to 70% of content give people in Ukrainian. But there is no single law which limited the communication in Russian. So those people who switch into Ukrainian, some part of them even in Kharkiv switch into Ukrainian after 2014, others in 2022, like my mom, who is 70 years old and she's ethnically Russian, or my friend, as I mentioned her, and she's my schoolmate, and she's speaking only Ukrainian with her 3 years old daughter. It was a conscious decision for them, or kind of demonstration of their civic position. But there are still, I would say, probably millions of those Ukrainians who speak in Russian with their families.
Yeah, of course, in the home, people speak whatever language they want. You know, and that's not going to change anywhere. Just as in Russia, people can speak Ukrainian or whatever. I'm just wondering, how about in the education system? Were there Russian-speaking schools? Were those transformed?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's because education is so critical.
Yeah, it is. Well, I remember 2020 where they also adopted the law on basic education, which prescribe education should be launched in Ukrainian mostly. But from another point of view, the school education is a matter of function to kind of provide it is a function of the local self-government in Ukraine. So the national government, they develop this general framework, but how it is functioning is responsibility of local communities. I think in most countries it's the same way. And in Kharkiv, for example, there were some classes and schools in general who just continue to provide education in Russian. And it was the case of my former school where my godson was studying. And that is why his parents decided to transfer him in another school where education is given in Ukrainian. And you know why? Because higher education in Ukraine is already in Ukrainian. And you have a good chances to win a state scholarship if you're passing these independent exams just after your school. And these independent exams, mostly in Ukrainian, with some exemptions for Hungarian, Romanian, and Roma minorities in western part of Ukraine. So if you want to have a scholarship and study for free, you are interested to study in Ukrainian. So it's more reasonable, economical reasons from the families, and I could see from my let's say schoolmates how they operate also with their children. In Kharkiv, a lot of people having teenagers, they hire teachers to improve the Ukrainian language for their children who were studying in Russian schools, just to provide them better chances to enter the university.
Did we have a question from our online? Because I know I had a relate, because I also had a
Not
language.
sure whether I can operate with
Oh, you
the.
don't need to do it.
Okay.
Zoya can monitor the questions, but I was looking about what unifies you. Maybe this will be, since so we don't want to keep people, but the uniting Ukrainians 25% language, disuniting 18 to 19% language, and then have you done this since the war? Speaking Ukrainian, more Ukrainian 78%. So for those who see unity, 25 languages isn't that big a concern. Presumably whatever language you speak, because you're supporting freedom and community and armed forces and helping each other. We're disuniting. What does it? Yeah. So
I would.
yeah, there's this. It's like the equal number for uniting and disuniting almost.
Yeah, I would like to go back to the recent polls, which I mentioned already. What is united and disconnecting Ukrainians, and wanted to show you that actually language could be the issue for up to 20% of Ukrainians, and mostly we can see that they are from the Galicia. All from the even less of them are from the eastern part or southern part. So people from the eastern part of Ukraine, they more afraid of to be accused for speaking Russian, that wanted to, to keep this right for centuries, or to be protected by Mr. Putin for speaking Russian. So for me, it's a long process. I'm not a proponent of radical decisions here. I'm totally in favor with the usage of Ukrainian by officials, and probably in universities, but having also programs in English, in Chinese, in French would be also a good idea, because our students, a lot of our students are abroad now. Some of them I'm teaching them on daily basis now online. Some stay loyal to Karazin University, even when they have a better opportunity to join German university or somewhere to join educational program in Canada. That is why I have a good hope that Ukrainian academia could be developed this way, not that way. And as for the society, well, I think it's a natural movement from below, that people feel not very comfortable recognizing that they are speaking and only in language of the people who are killing them. So it's more about inner comfort. So a lot of people who speak in Russian now, I met them a lot, especially in Kharkiv, visiting my city. I can hear more Ukrainian on the street, but still it's not the vast majority as to me. So they say, may I speak Russian, or excuse me for speaking Russian because my Ukrainian is not so perfect now. So they feel this inner inconvenience and probably guilt for speaking Russian, because now for this generation and probably for younger generation, it is a language of aggressor. It's just like speaking German in France in 40s, right? In 46, for example, in 1946. So I think it will be a natural process. And for me, the main purpose for Ukrainian kind of governmental policy is not to push too much, but from another point of view, is not let make it a point for national security and defense. And the final point here that we are going to the European Union, and it is pretty serious for all Ukrainian societies. You can see, for example, it's Unite Ukrainians, this idea of accession to the EU. And the European Union is a serious kind of entity which has a lot of demands to newcomers and their member states, and to provide human rights, lingual rights, this cultural diversity is kind of obligation of every state who wants to join. And I believe that in a few years, when some kind of negotiation could be started, this keeping this diversity, including Russian language in some Ukrainian regions, will be the issue which I think we could solve somehow, because to enter to the EU is more even important than not to speak Russian.
There's a question from the audience if you think that most of the Ukrainians who left for Western countries will return to Ukraine.
Well, I'm not in migration studies. I want to warn you, and but I try to trace these trends, and it depends on the hosting country. We can see, for example, that from the very beginning of the war, the vast majority of Ukrainians find themselves in Poland, and the second place was Germany, who hosted up to 1 million Ukrainians. Now we have a huge decrease of people who stay in Poland, but those who are in Germany increased instead. So now Germany is the first country where Ukrainians are hosted. And I can understand, I'm not a refugee, I have no social benefits of payment from Germany, but now I co-work in the ZOiS, which is in Berlin, and thank them for this cooperation. I can see that German integrational policy is very smooth. And that is why a lot of Ukrainians moved from Poland there. But from another point of view, there are a lot of Ukrainians who come back. And according to some polls, up to 40% probably will stay in these countries where they are located now. We should be aware of this. And the second point here will be will concern men who are now banned from leaving the country, but after the martial law will be denounced, they probably would like to join their families abroad. And it put Ukraine under their so huge demographic burden, because not even taking the lack of manpower on a battle front, or on the front line on the battlefield, we also lacking at this particular moment manpower to reconstruct and to recover the country. So yeah, the demographic will be even probably the huge problem in the future post-war development. And among them, it's fighting corruption and restoring all the amount of liberal kind of institutions in Ukraine, and independent institutions.
I also have a question, and in fact, this question have already been asked back in Ottawa last week. The panel was probably the most successful, I want to say. Like, people were so engaged. It was on the reconstruction of Ukraine, and that was not even like a moment to ask a question, and I remember that there was a fight for the microphone. I
Yeah,
was
that's
accidentally. But I think I absolutely understand that it was impossible to address all of the issues, but in the same time, I'm interested in this unequal reconstruction in Ukraine, and that some of the places are covered and reconstructed and the others are not. So I'm wondering, is this like an administrative issue which is in place that not, it is not clear who is responsible for what, or is it more that the certain Romade or communities in English are more responsible and more invested into that, and they're giving their own money? In your view, how do you see the situation? And maybe for the speaker or for the people present here, I'm talking about the example, even let's say, I think you probably also know examples in the Kharkiv region, but something I've noticed and observed, it was Kyiv and Kyiv region, and whereas Hostomel is more or less, just it does not look as destroyed as, for example, Borodyanka. Borodyanka still, it happened 2022 March, and I've been there this summer, and they're the whole street of houses, every second house is just burned down, So I'm just wondering what the issue is there, and is there also potential in the future if you see that there should be a concern that Ukraine will be rebuilt unequally, and how can we potentially avoid this?
Yeah, thank you for this question. If I would know the answer, I probably could replace Mr. Zelensky or at least some ministers in his government, but I do not have any particular answer at this moment, just because I'm an analyst, not a decision maker. But we can see from this slide that reconstruction is united Ukrainians at this moment. But from my point of view, it could be the point where the most conflict could be started. It's also about this inequality in reconstruction, which will be the issue not only between different Ukrainian macro regions. It's already there. For example, Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, as a communities, as a cities, they increased their income, local income, during the war on 30%. The other, when others were devastated. Also, there are questions if we need to rebuild some even towns or cities or industries in Ukraine. It's a huge question about the future reintegration of Donbass, whether it should be reindustrialization there, because a lot of facilities they destroyed, a lot of factories already not existing anymore. The same questions whether it's worth it to rebuild Izuma, Kupiansk, and Kharkiv, which are under the constant shell. So how can you do it? But when talking about governmental and local level, there are certain things which couldn't be definitely made by local communities themselves. It's electricity, it's water supplies, not within the city, but the general, infrastructural things, which definitely couldn't be made even by regional government. But what is happening now in Kharkiv, a lot of residential buildings, they already rebuilt by means of local budgets. So they find something to provide people with housing. And actually, thank you to mention Kharkiv again, because for me, it's a unique city, not because it's my home city, not only because of that, but it's a city which lost a lot. Including people who fled, but also it's city which is now hosting about 400,000 of people from the nearest region. So it is losing, but it is also facing how to cope with these internally displaced people without housing, without jobs, and so on and so forth. But it is coping somehow. Well, and if you check Dream.gov.ua site, it's this digital recovery ecosystem for accountable management. So it's kind of the digital instrument, how to be accountable during the reconstruction. You can see that it's mostly project of reconstruction only in Kyiv regional. And there are no clear criteria how to rebuild, whom give money, or it should be grants, loans, and so on and so far. There are no strict, I would say, or no clear signals from donors, and there are no clear demands from foreign investors. But talking about the foreign businesses who supposedly should come to Ukraine and bring some money, I don't believe that they will be so risky to build something in the eastern or southern part of Ukraine. So it will be inequality not only between regions, but also there will be inequality within regions, and there will be competition and I would say some conflicts between governmental, regional, and local levels of government.
Thank you so much.
I want to ask about Karazin University. How are you teaching? How are students studying under such conditions? What are the main challenges, issues you face?
Thank you for asking about the university and students. Well, it is there were some ideas to go back to in-person education in general in Kharkiv, and of course for most of parents to relaunch in-person school education is more important, because they need to care, to find somebody who caring about their small children when they are working. So it's also function of school education, right? Primary schools, secondary schools, they're more about this, and of course to provide their children with a normal socializing. It's a huge challenge, but it was decided that Kharkiv was not so secure to go back to in-person education. And I remember when being in Kharkiv during the vacations, I tried to figure out how much time do I have to bring my students to basement if there is an airstrike alarm. And I understood that having about 10,000 of students before the war, okay, probably 1/3 of them were foreign students who left Ukraine, probably forever. But still having a lot of students altogether, it will be impossible to reach the shelter because the time when Russian missiles could target Kharkiv was from 40 seconds to 2 minutes. And sometimes there is explosions first and then a siren we can hear there in Kharkiv. So I think it's a wise decision to keep online education in Ukrainian universities. And from another point of view, we have a lot of students who outside Ukraine, or at least outside Kharkiv. Previous semester, it's probably not an accurate statistic, but what I faced with, for example, when teaching the selective course for the whole university, 1/3 was abroad, 1/3 was in Ukraine, normally in central Ukraine. Kharkiv citizens, they don't like to go far because they are ready to return every minute. And 1/3 was in Kharkiv, were in Kharkiv. So how to return the students if go back to personal education in person, because when they have this opportunity to stay online with their peers, with their teachers, with their professors, we can keep them as Ukrainians, as Karazin students. And when they will be put into kind of situation of choose something, to stay in German university or to go back to Kharkiv where it's insecure still, I'm not sure that they will choose Kharkiv. So I think it's a wise decision to keep them in this, Ukrainian agenda, to provide them Ukrainian education and keep fingers crossed that probably in 5 years, in 3 years, they will come back in Ukraine at least, and they will stay on one page with their peers who are in Ukraine. And the one interesting fact from political science department, for example, and I know that some other faculties like sociological one, the faculty of philosophy, we have even more freshmates. We have more students who decided to enter to the university this year, this summer, comparatively to those who entered in 2022. So it was a shock situation, I think, for a lot of school children or those who were considering to get into university. Others were under their 17 and they fled Ukraine with their parents. Now, even those who are physically outside Ukraine, they still decided to join Karazin University. And for me, it's a good point that that is probably a quality mark. And from another point of view, it's also the demonstration of this overall Ukrainian cohesion and resilience. When you still support your university, your city, main university, I would say, or most prominent university, by joining online to the education and by entering to the your home city institution.
Thank you. I just hope you get to go back and the students get to go back, and I just, but you overall presented a very optimistic picture, and I find that most of what we hear is optimistic. So thank you for that and for your hard work, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.